Pesach is about to end. We're going to welcome the chameitz back into our lives. We're going to open our kitchens and our homes back up to things that we had previously banished. Each of us probably has a favorite post-Pesach bready snack that we're looking forward to sinking our teeth into. What's yours? We're forbidden from eating or owning any kind of chameitz for the 7 or 8 days of Pesach. And chameitz is food that is puffed up. The yeast in the flour and the gluten creates these little hot pockets of gas, pockets of hot air. We sometimes talk about chameitz as the kind of hot air, the extra stuff that we don't really need, that isn't serving us, that's maybe puffing us up with arrogance or holding us back in some way from being our essential selves. And so the process of removing chameitz, which we do for Pesach, is a process of paring down to essentials, of getting rid of those things that we don't really need, that are holding us back, that are giving us an inflated sense of ourselves. This is a goal year-round. Pesach is just the commanded time in which we are most concentratedly attacking it. And I always find that as the end of Pesach approaches, I reintegrate chametz back into my life after Havdalah with a little bit of regret. I've gotten used to the space that taking away the chametz gave me. I've gotten used to not having those things I didn't need. And putting them back in feels a little sad. Rabbi Dr. Deborah Reed Blank, who was my liturgy teacher at Hebrew College, used to remind us that chametz in Torah times was not just hot air. It wasn't just the puffiness of the bread, but it referred to the kind of bread that the Israelites made year-round using sourdough. They would catch wild sourdough starters, because before commercial yeast, this was what you did. You took your bowl with your flour and your water and you mixed them up. You put them somewhere sunny and you let the fresh air blow over them, and you waited for the flour and the water to start bubbling, because you would have caught a wild sourdough starter. And matzah, in her and other scholars' opinion, was the bread that didn't use that sourdough, that didn't use that kind of leavening, but instead was like the freshest and most delicious soft pita bread. It wasn't lechem oni yet at that point. It wasn't bread of affliction. It was just this fine, fresh, wheat harvesty bread that didn't have the sour taste and the slow fermentation of a wild starter. There are actually entries in the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, from Arabic, from Akkadian, from an older Ethiopian language, that all focus on chametz as the sour taste rather than the puffy texture. So when I was in college, I baked a lot with sourdough because I had the time and I loved it. And I made my own college try at catching a wild starter, and I tried a few times. And with a starter, you really have to mix up your ingredients, leave it out, open up the window, and wait and see what you get. Pray if you're so inclined, because some wild sourdough starters taste amazing and some of them taste disgusting. So I hit a few bad ones in a row. I gave up. I went to my local store and I got a commercial sourdough starter. And then I had this little sourdough animal living in the back of my fridge. And sourdough requires a lot of us, baking with sourdough. It's a slow rise. It takes about twice the amount of time that working with active dry yeast or even instant yeast will for each rise, about double the time. So you really have to commit a large chunk of time to baking with sourdough. And the flavor, because it develops slowly, is strong and complex and rich. You're really aware of what you're eating when you put sourdough into your body, and even more so when you are making the sourdough product. So I spent that time in college that felt kind of like an incubation, that winter and spring where I baked almost every week with sourdough. I'd take my cup, I'd dip out that cupful of starter, and then I'd put back in. You have to replenish that well with about the same amount of flour and water that you take out. And I'd spend almost a day baking a good loaf of bread. And I found that it really nourished me. From that sourness came this incredible taste and this incredible sense of having taken care of my body, being able to feed myself, being able to feed my friends to whom I gave the bread. And that was a kind of chametz that felt really life-giving to me. So we're in Pesach, this time when we are commanded to forswear chameitz, to say, you know what, that kind of slow cooking, that kind of sour, rich taste, we're going to put that aside. We're going to go for things that are easier and more simple to make, so we're concentrating a little less on the tastes that we're putting into our bodies. And as we get ready for Pesach to end, I think about what are the kinds of chameitz that I want to welcome back into my life, welcome back into my home and my kitchen and my practices. What are the habits that are like hot air, like that first kind of chameitz that really puffed me up, held me back, didn't do much for me? What was unnecessarily complicated? What was unnecessarily expensive? Rabbi Gordon Tucker was my chavruta during the Global Justice Fellowship of American Jewish World Service this year. And when the fellowship was in Guatemala just 2.5 short months ago, he brought a beautiful teaching from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. And he talked about these fountains for bathing that are warm. They're like hot springs, and people enjoy them and they bathe for pleasure in them. And these fountains are sitting right over the entrance to Gehinnom, to hell. And the text very explicitly says people are enjoying themselves by means of the fires of hell. So that kind of heat, that kind of hot air that is produced by people's suffering, I know that some of my habits are giving me pleasure based on things that are happening for other people that are not right. And Pesach and its close is a time for me to examine what of my habits have been giving me pleasure based off of people's suffering. Is that delicious chocolate I go out and buy based on child labor that is underpaid? Is the quick home delivery from an online shopping site put together by somebody who has to fill a box every 11 seconds without bathroom breaks or miss some of their pay? So I need to take a look at that kind of chametz in my life and say, where is that hot air that is produced by other people's suffering that is giving me some benefit that I can really do without, that I don't need, that this Pesach I can leave behind, or better yet, change the system so that if I need that enjoyment, I no longer get it from a place of somebody else's pain. I also think about what I am excited to welcome back into my life as Pesach closes. What are those slow processes, those slow habits that nourish me, that I really sink my fingers into the same way I would sink my hands into that bread dough? What gives me that long fermenting, that long growing complexity and richness of taste and flavor that lets me know that I'm feeding myself, I'm feeding my soul, and I'm also feeding the needs of the people I love? Is that cooking with other people, sitting down to a meal together, making music in the same room as someone else? When this Pesach ends, when this pandemic ends, what are those long, slow habits of healthful sour chametz that produce the sweetness that we need to live, that we can reclaim, that we can sink back into, and that we can allow to grow and rise in our lives? So that is my prayer for this Pesach, that we all find the strength and the discernment to look at each potential piece of chametz that we have the opportunity now to choose whether or not to reintegrate into our own lives when quarantine ends, as it will. As it will. We don't know when, but it will come to an end, and then we will have to choose. Are the systems that we engaged in before, are they hot air based on somebody else's pain? And if so, what are we going to do about that? And what are the things that are essential to our well-being and to the well-being of the world? And how can we let those structures and those processes be as slow and as rich and as deeply involved as that second kind of chametz, the sour workings that produce the sweetness and the nourishment? May we all own that choice, and may we choose for good and for life, and make it with the best information we have, which is all that we can do. A happy end of Pesach to you all, I hope to see you soon.